Good morning. Well, thanks for responding back. And I'm a native New Yorker, and by the third good morning, it would have been an eyebrow raise, a head nod, not an actual vocal presence. So I appreciate you all. Thank you all for coming. It's an honor to introduce Tim Wise to help ignite this event. We invited him to join us to mix things up a little bit. I'm guessing, but I feel like this isn't the first time he's heard at a speaking event, but he's the first white keynote we've had at this conference. With the theme, Where Do We Go Now?, we were looking for a different voice. Not only is Tim one of the most prominent anti-racist activists in the United States and has spoken in countries across the world, he is also an independent school parent. So we wanted to provide another vantage point, another resource for what it might be like for communities and schools and people to move, to think, to connect differently. In his acclaimed memoir, White Like Me, Reflections on Race from a Privileged Son, Tim writes, "We can say we believe in diversity and equity and value multiculturalism and integration, but if we send out children to monoracial, monocultural schools, live in monoracial, monocultural neighborhoods, and expose them to social settings in which everyone looks like them, they will see the inconsistency, translate it as hypocrisy, and conclude that we, as parents, are lying to them when it comes to that which we value. We appreciate you all being here to combat some of those hypocrisies, to diversify the faces, the voices, the ideas of your school communities, and thinking about where do we go now, navigating privilege, equity, and voice. Also consider moving through diversity to inclusion so that all students and their educators in independent schools feel supported, particularly those who come from the fringe or totally outside of those monoracial, monocultural neighborhoods, taking the opportunity to not only look, but listen and learn." Activist, author, and speaker Tim Wise began his career organizing against neo-Nazi political candidate David Duke over 25 years ago. He has since been named one of the 25 visionaries who are changing your world by Utne Reader, has contributed chapters or essays to over 25 additional books, and his writings are taught in colleges and universities across the nation. His essays have appeared on Alternet, Salon, Huffington Post, Counterpunch, The Root, Black Commentator, BK Nation, and Z Magazine, among other popular, professional, and scholarly journals. Wise is an author of 7 books, including his latest, Under the Affluence, Shaming the Poor, Praising the Rich, and Sacrificing the Future of America, Dear White America, Letter to a New Minority, and his highly acclaimed memoir, White Like Me, Reflections on Race from a Privileged Son. He is also the host of a new podcast, Speak Out with Tim Wise. Not so new, it's almost 20 episodes in. Drops on Tuesdays. Wise has been featured in several documentaries, including White Like Me, Racism, and White Privilege in America. He also appeared alongside legendary scholar and activist Angela Davis in the 2011 documentary Vocabulary of Change, where Davis and Wise discuss the connections between the issues of race, class, gender, sexuality, and militarism, as well as intergenerational movement building and the prospects for social change. Wise appears regularly on CNN and MSNBC to discuss race issues and was featured in a 2007 segment on 2020. He graduated from Tulane in 1990 and received anti-racism training from the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond in New Orleans. Please welcome Tim Wise.
Sorry, I did that. I killed that by closing the computer that's up here. I apologize for ruining your technology. But I'll tell you, it's a real honor to be the first white keynote breaking that color line. I'm feeling really good about that. Not quite Jackie Robinson level impressive, really, but wait till I tell my people. They'll be so proud that I'm holding it down up here for them. Yeah, I ain't holding it down for them, that's for sure. It's not why they brought me, and it's certainly not why I came. haven't you only had like 2 keynotes though? I mean, like, right? Like it was Brother West and me. Now, it is nice to follow him, and I'm not going to be able to do what he did. I'm not even going to try. But when you say like you're the first white out of 2, like that, I don't even know. Whatever, you know. Whatever you got to do to feel inclusive, you just do that. You just feel like you're including us white folks. It's good. It is good to be here. It's early to be here, but it's good to be here. Like I had all day yesterday to relax. I know some of you got in late last night, so you probably are a little more tired than I am. But it is a real honor to be here. I know many of you in the room, many old friends, and by that I don't mean you're particularly aged. Not that there would be anything wrong with being aged. I just mean I've known you for more than a minute, and it's good to see you again. Lots of new folks who I don't know, but apparently you'll be downloading my podcast, which is great. If I get nothing else out of this, I'll get more listeners, I suppose. Trying to think about what I wanted to tell you today, and I guess I want to start off by saying that, you know, we're in interesting times. That's going to be the biggest understatement, I guess, that I'll offer in the presentation today. Both interesting and incredibly dangerous times. And they're dangerous for a couple of reasons. For the last 8 or 9 years, my gig, as it were, has been, and this isn't just me, any of us in the room who do equity work, and talk about issues of racism and institutionalized racism in particular. For the last 8 or 9 years, our job has been, for lack of a better way to put it, convincing white people that this is still a thing, right? And the reason we've had to do that is because we had a black president and a lot of white folks thought that was it. Because if you have a black president, obviously you don't have a problem anymore, just like I'm sure everyone in here remembers when patriarchy was eliminated in Pakistan once Benazir Bhutto was elected, not once but twice, a woman. You do recall that, right? Yeah, that didn't happen. But a lot of folks apparently believe that in this country, if you elected a man of color, that the problem of racism, the problem of white privilege, institutionalized privilege, and inequality had been eradicated. So for 8 or 9 years, that was sort of our job. And it was exhausting, right? And if it was exhausting for me, I can only imagine how exhausting it was for people of color, because it was constant having to prove that this thing was still a problem in spite of the election of a man of color to the highest office in the land. So here's the deal. I'm not known for my sunny optimism about this country, but here's one little silver lining in the storm cloud. Yeah, we really don't have to do that shit anymore, do we? We don't really have to prove it any longer, right? It's not a real hard lesson to learn. People are sort of beginning to see, I think, the obviousness of the problem. Now, I'm teasing when I call it a silver lining, because obviously it's not. In order for us to see it so directly, it's only because there's been such an upsurge in overt hostility, 22% increase in hate crime activity over the last year, several murders and overt assaults, blatant acts of racism and white supremacy committed in our nation. Of course, we had the Tiki Torch March in Charlottesville. I'm sure all of you will agree that nothing says white power like a bunch of 22-year-old white boys in khakis walking around with oversized Polynesian candles. I'm sure that you will agree that when you have a Pier 1 riot like that, there's nothing that says white power better and white supremacy than that. The only problem, of course, is when you have those overt acts of violence and overt acts of hatred, 18 murders, for instance, committed by white supremacists and neo-Nazis over the last year, double the number, by the way, in this country committed by Muslim extremists, although the Department of Homeland Security doesn't want you to know that. When you have that, it becomes very easy for the rest of us, doesn't it, to distance ourselves from it. And that's the danger in it, right? The danger the last 8 or 9 years was people not thinking racism was real. The danger now is thinking that it is real, but it only looks like that, right? That it only looks like Richard Spencer and other overt white nationalists. That it only looks like David Duke, that guy that you heard that I was working against about a quarter century ago. It only looks like overt hostility and people with swastika flags or Confederate flags or whatever else, right? Demanding a white ethno-state. But I want to suggest to you that it's very dangerous for us to try to distance ourselves from those folks, because we're often just, 1 degree of separation, 2 degrees of separation from them. And even when we're not, even when we aren't the kind of people who would ever engage in that overt hostility that we see on the news every now and then, or we see in a Twitter feed every now and then, the reality is that we still live in a society of inequality for which we are all to blame. After all, David Duke isn't to blame for the fact that the typical white family in this country has 15 times the net worth of the typical black family. Because David Duke doesn't have the power to have made that happen. He's not to blame for the fact, neither is any white supremacist or neo-Nazi, to blame for the fact that even white households headed by a high school dropout have more net worth on average than black households headed by a college graduate. David Duke's not to blame for that. Or the fact that white families have 11 to 12 times the net worth of Latinx families on average. He's not to blame for that. Richard Spencer's not to blame. None of those boys in Charlottesville are to blame for the fact that according to a 7-year study of tens of thousands of police precincts and counties around the country, law enforcement are 3.2 times more likely to shoot black folks than white folks, even when those black folks are unarmed and posing no threat. David Duke isn't to blame for that. The disparities we see in our K-12 educational system, both public and private, independent schools, is not the work of neo-Nazis and white supremacists. It's the workings of a larger society. It's the result of a legacy of inequality that we all have inherited. So if all we do is sort of cluck our tongues and point at those people who are the obvious racists, we let ourselves off the hook for having to do anything. Here's the point I guess I'm trying to make to you. If the bar that you set is you are not a Nazi, that's a very low bar. Right? If the bar that we set is, I do not believe in a white ethno-state, that's a very low bar. We have to do quite a bit more than that. And sometimes I fear that when things are so obvious and so blatant, it becomes easy to get distance in our independent schools, in our communities, and in our society more broadly. So let's just try to remember that as we move forward and as we try to create policies, practices, and procedures in our institutions that allow us to move forward and to become more equitable. The second thing I want to point out to you, and I always try to start relatively early on with this because I feel like sometimes we believe that we are more committed than we are. Here's the thing. In our independent schools, and I am an independent school parent, and I have been for 12 years, let's just acknowledge up front that these are places where inequity and privilege are baked into the process. They're not some happenstance or accident, right? It's not like a glitch, it's a feature, right? Right? So it's not like you can just update the app and get rid of the glitch. No. If you actually want to uproot inequity in your institution, you have to actually create new hardware, okay? And most of the time, we don't really want to do that. And you know what? That's all right. I know. I get it. But I just want us to be honest, because if we're starting with the presumption that we're actually about the radical transformation of our institutions and we're not, then we just get frustrated, and we frustrate a lot of other people, particularly those folks of color who we bring in and put all the burden on them to do the work to transform us. And then when they can't, then they get burnt out and they look for their next move and they move away. See, if we would just be more honest and be like, yeah, we're not really looking to radically transform, but we'd like to get a little better. Let's just start with that, right? Because when schools tell me, oh yeah, we want all kinds, we want more diversity. How much you want? How much do you want? Because when you tell me the sky is the limit, I do not believe you. Because I just don't. Because I know what happens when the sky actually becomes the limit, right? When the school gets a little bit too different, that's when y'all start getting letters and when you get nervous. And that's when alums start causing trouble and parents start causing trouble and go, oh, I don't know about this. I'll come back to this in a minute. I just want to seed this out there, because I do believe that there's a limit. And I just want folks to be honest about what their limit is. And then within that limit, then we can do some work. Right? And we can make it more equitable and more just for the folks who are there. But let's not pretend that we're really down to radically transform the institutions if we're not. Let's just be honest. Let's shoot straight with each other, because our schools are places of inequality, not by accident, but on purpose. Doesn't mean they can't be made better. Doesn't mean they can't be made more equitable. And it certainly doesn't mean that we can't prepare the folks who are there, including the white folks who were there, including the affluent folks who were there, including the cisgendered and straight folks who were there, and the able-bodied folks who were there, and all the more privileged folks who were there, that we can prepare them for that world to go out there and create more equity and justice. We can do that, but we just have to be honest about who we are and what our institutional DNA has always been about. Next point. And one would think that I wouldn't have to say this so many years into this work. And many of y'all have been doing this work for a long time too, and I guess it does bear repeating that diversity and inclusion is not the same thing as equity and justice. We've been a very diverse nation for a very long time. First of all, this was a diverse place before Europeans ever set foot on it because there were hundreds of indigenous nations, very diverse in and of themselves. White folks came, made it even more diverse, I suppose, right? Actually, there were some African folk here first who actually got dumped by the Spanish off the coast of South Carolina before the Mayflower. We sometimes forget that. So there were Africans here before most of our white ancestors were. So they made it more diverse. There have always been diverse. There were lots of folks in the Southwest who are just coming home, and we don't want to let them, right? Let you marinate on that for a second. Folks whose land we took in a war of aggression that we started on false pretense. Now they want to come home, and we tell them, no, we changed the locks. Right? So this has always been a diverse place, never been an inclusive and equitable place, though, at the levels of power and authority. So we can have diversity, we can even have inclusion, we don't necessarily get equity. And I really understood the difference between this thing the first time I ever went to Minnesota for a talk. Some of y'all have heard this story, but it bears repeating. Anybody here from Minnesota? Uh-huh. Always a couple of y'all. And look, I love Minnesota. I do. I love it. It's cold. It's real cold, but I like Minnesota a lot, right? But the first time I went there is when I really came to appreciate the difference between diversity and equity, right? I'd gone up there for a talk. I'd just gotten on the road. I mean, we're talking the very first couple of months that I was out there. So I'm like 26, 27, whatever it was. And I get picked up at the airport by these three very nice white liberal kids, you know, who went to the college that was bringing me in. And as we're driving back about an hour from the airport to the school, we were talking, and the guy goes, I'm so excited that you're going to be here for our diversity day. And now I was scared, right? Because when you tell me you have a diversity day, sort of tells me indirectly what the other 364 days are going to be like, right? So I get a little nervous. And I wanted to be polite because I was excited too, right? I'm on the road. I'm doing my thing. This is what I want to do. I'm happy to be there. So I said, well, I'm happy to be here too. This is great. And so we keep on talking. And I wanted to know some things about the school because I wanted to make sure that I addressed any kind of particular concerns, you know, that night in the talk. And this is before anybody really had, you know, any kind of widespread internet access. So I didn't have access to this information. You know, this is back in the days of catalogs and stuff, right? When we printed out documents, and I didn't have any of those. So I wanted to know some things about the school. I didn't know anything. They start telling me, but really what I wanted wasn't just like demographic information or who majors in what. I needed to know something about the racial climate. And so I asked them about that, and the guys looked at me like I had called their mother a horrible name, right? They just sort of looked wounded in this earnest Midwest Minnesota kind of way, right? They just looked at me, and this one guy goes, well, goodness no. And he actually said goodness no because it is Minnesota, and he is incredibly earnest, right? Goodness no, we don't have any racism here. And I thought, well, now that is weird. Like that is strange, right? I mean, for a couple of reasons it's weird. Number one, I am an anti-racism educator. So why in the hell would you bring me in if you don't have any racism? That seems like a odd waste of your money and my time. Now, make no mistake, I'm going to take your money. And I'm going to give my time. But it just seems weird and redundant and odd, you know? But the second reason it was weird and odd is I've been white a long time, and now almost 50 years. But even at 26 or 27, I have been white long enough to know that when other white people tell me there's no racism operating in a place, I don't automatically assume that they know what the hell they're talking about. Like, I don't just jump to the conclusion that they're probably right. I tend to doubt them. Just like when men tell me there's no sexism, yeah, I'm going to check with some women. That's just me. That's just sort of what I do, you know. I know it's weird, but I just sort of like to verify, you know, get a second opinion is my thing. So these guys are like, yeah, there's no racism. And I said, well, how do you know that? I mean, that seems odd, right? But I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they know something I don't. I said, how do you know? They said, well, it's this thing we have. I was like, what? You have a thing that gets rid of racism? That's amazing. Why haven't I heard about that? I was living in New Orleans. I know we didn't have it. I was getting ready to go to Michigan after I got done in Minnesota. I was fairly confident they didn't have it. I wanted to pick it up. Where do I get this thing? You know, and I said it just like that because I'm sort of a smartass, but they, being earnest Midwesterners, did not actually pick up on the cynicism in my voice. It just went completely over their heads, so I let it drop. And they said, no, really, we have this thing. And I said, well, tell me what it is. Stop teasing me. They said, well, it's sort of our way of life here. It's like our motto. It's like our slogan. It's our thing. And then they told me what it was. They said, it's this thing we like to call, and the couple of Minnesotans in the room know what's coming, Minnesota nice. Yeah, that's what I did. And I was waiting for the rest of the answer, right? Because I thought that can't really be it, right? That's like a bumper sticker, right? It's a tourist commission slogan. I'm not confident that it's a thing that actually gets rid of racism, right? So I said, what is that? And the guy goes, well, it's just sort of like the golden rule. You just treat people the way you want to be treated. I'm like, really? That works here? That works. That gets rid of racism here, because that has been around forever. And it's never gotten rid of racism anywhere else. But here, you're telling me, in Minnesota, that golden rule, given a particular geographic semi-Norwegian spin, suddenly begins to work. And they said yes, earnestly, and I let it drop because I knew I wasn't going to get anywhere. But I decided what I would do is I would have a conversation with people of color over the next several months. I was back and forth to the state a few times, and so I asked them about it, right? So I'd ask black folks, and I'd ask Latinx folks, and I would ask Asian Pacific Americans, particularly like in the Hmong community, Southeast Asian communities in the Twin Cities, talk to some indigenous folks about it. And I asked them about this Minnesota nice, and they all had the same response, right? They all rolled their eyes, and I mean like the kind of eye roll, I don't mean like a subtle, I don't want you to see me roll my eyes kind of eye roll. I mean like the kind of eye roll that you can hear the eyeballs rotate in the socket kind of eye roll, right? Like it's a Vegas slot machine, that kind of thing. And it was like they had rehearsed this answer, but these people didn't even know each other, right? But they all had the same answer down. They're like, oh God, Minnesota nice is killing us. And I said, really? Talk to me about that, right? And they said, well, a couple of reasons. Number one, we know that outward civility sometimes masks great contempt, right? And we've caught people who are very outwardly civil and nice, undermining us on the job, undermining us in the schools, saying things about us behind our back, telling racist jokes, doing all these things that, aren't very nice. They just do them in a very sort of passive-aggressive way or a very hidden kind of way, but we've seen it. So number one, we don't trust it. But the second problem, and this is the one that really pertains to what I want to talk to you all about, is that if we feel marginalized in a space, if we feel a lack of belonging and voice in a space, and we want to change that, we have to raise our voice above a whisper in order to get change done. And in the minute that we do that, we're the ones who get tagged as what? Not nice. We become the violators of the cultural norm that this entire thing is based on in this state. Right? So once you complain, once you try to actually make change, you now get labeled the problem because you have introduced race into a room where they didn't think it existed until you brought it up. You have now violated their cultural norm. So what I came to realize was these three young men that had picked me up at the airport, all of whom, again, very nice. And I have no doubt that they were sincere when they said they wanted more diversity and were excited about this event. I have no doubt that when they say they would like to have a more inclusive campus, they were not being disingenuous, they were being honest. The problem is that was only going to work even for them within the context of a cultural norm of niceness, right? So as long as those folks can come in and get with our thing, everything will be fine. But now don't y'all forget, it's our thing, right? It's our place. And we're going to invite you all in because we'd like a little color here. But don't forget, it's our place. Whiteness is the sun. Y'all are just the planets, faithfully keeping orbit around it. And we can look at those planets and go, my goodness, Neptune is beautiful today. And look at those rings on Saturn. But don't forget that the sun is the giver of all life. And we will remain the sun. Do you understand? So you're going to get with our thing. But don't try to change our thing because we like our thing. And it's going to stay our thing. So diversity and inclusion is nice, but unless we actually interrogate the cultural norms and the assumptions and the understandings of the institutions, right, we don't necessarily get to equity. In fact, we probably will not get to equity. And it's important to understand this because this affects directly the way in which students of color and families of color who engage with our independent school communities receive and experience those opportunities and those spaces, right? The difference between folks of color having a burden of representation in those spaces versus mostly white folks having the privilege of belonging. What do I mean by that, right? The privilege of knowing that my belonging in that space is never going to be questioned. No one is ever going to wonder whether or not I had to pull some kind of special strings to get in, or whether or not I'm only there because the school made a special effort to include people like me. No one is going to ask whether that white student who's 5 generations at that school actually has the academic merit to be there, or if it's simply about coasting on the name of that family and the donation made to the library fund. Nobody's even going to ask. How many black and brown students and families, however, do I have to speak to at our independent schools around this country who say they are constantly presumed to A, be on financial aid even when they're not, B, if they're on financial aid, not deserve to be there? Here's my point, C, let me tell you something. If you are on financial aid and you're still able to get into and succeed at our independent schools, let me argue that you're actually more deserving of being there than the folks who are 5 generations in. Because if your family can just write a check for those children, that means they've had some advantages. They damn well ought to be able to get into that school and succeed. But the folks who can't write the check, if they can still pull it off, yeah, they need to be there. They deserve to be there. But see, that's never presumed. They're still presumed to be the beneficiaries of some charitable work rather than having actually earned their way in. And so they have a constant burden of representation, knowing that if they screw it up, and I'm not just talking about the students now, I mean the faculty, I mean the staff, I mean the administrators of color who know that if they don't live up to standards, they may not only be letting themselves down, which is bad enough, but they may actually be letting down folks like them coming after, because they know that it will stick to others in ways it will not to dominant group members. These are the things that non-dominant group members have to think about that the rest of us don't, because we have that privilege of belonging. And this affects student performance, right? Some of y'all are certainly familiar with Claude Steele and Josh Aronson and their work and others on stereotype vulnerability, stereotype threat. What does that research tell us? It tells us that when you're a member of a group against which there are negative stigmas about performance, let's say in an academic sphere, right, that you can be just as talented, just as qualified, just as capable, study just as hard, just as serious as a student, but the mere fact that you are having to compete against not only other students, but against a stereotype about which you are aware and which you desperately don't want to confirm, will add stress to your academic experience that will drive down performance independent of your own ability, independent of your own levels of preparation, independent of how hard you study. This research has been going back now for 30 years. They first started doing it with men and women, actually, on math exams. They then later extended it to race and class and a lot of other categories. Just to give you a quick recap, what they did was they would take men and women who had always been good math students, and they would put them in different rooms and give them a math test, because keep in mind, the stereotype, right, the stigma here is that women are not as good as men at advanced or difficult math. This, of course, is disproven all around the world, but it is a very common stereotype in the West. Right? And so because of that stigma, and because women are aware of that stigma, the theory that these researchers, social psychologists, all of them, put forward was that that could independently affect their performance when they sit down to take a test where they're afraid that they might confirm the negative stereotype. So they took men and women, they put them in 2 different rooms and gave them a math exam. In one room where there were men and women, they told the test takers this was a test of their actual math ability. In other words, that it was diagnostic of their actual talent. It would be graded, it would tell them how good they were, blah, blah, blah. And the second group was given the very same questions, the very same test, and these were equally qualified folks in both rooms. But in the second room, they were told it's not diagnostic, it doesn't mean anything, we're not even going to grade it. We're just going to observe the way that people take tests, something innocuous and non-stressful like that. What do you think happened? In the group where there was no pressure, there was no statistically significant difference between the men and women on the test. In the room where it was said to be diagnostic, there was a substantial difference, with men doing far better than women. They replicated it over and over and over. Then they did it with race. They took white folks and black folks, put them in a room, told them they were taking a diagnostic test of verbal skills. White folks did far better than the black folks. In the other room, equally qualified white and black folks took the same test, told it wasn't diagnostic, wasn't going to be graded, didn't mean anything, no statistically significant difference in the outcomes. They replicated it over and over and over again. Then they started extending it to other arenas, right? They started looking at athletics, but not like a sport where a stereotype would be real obvious. They wanted to see how deep this went, so they took white guys and black guys, put them on a miniature golf course, right? And told them, this is a test of your natural athletic ability. The hell? Y'all ever play putt-putt? The hell kind of natural athletic ability you got to have to play putt-putt? It's geometry and some hand-eye coordination. That's all it is. But if you tell them natural athletic ability, what happens? Now the white folks freak out. Oh my God. I'm playing mini golf against black people who I know have more fast twitch muscle fibers and an extra femur and a spring in their ankle. Because that stereotype is often believed, right? Even on a mini golf course, the white folks are like, oh my God, and they're 15 over par or some shit, you know? You tell the same skill level white and black mini golf players that it's a test of strategic sports intelligence, which I'm not sure what that is, but I'm fairly confident it doesn't apply to mini golf, right? But if you tell them that, now it's the black folks who freak out because now you've tripped this stereotype about intelligence. Now the white folks feel more confident. They end up doing better. They've done it with age. Take younger folks and older folks, right? Give them a test. If you tell them it's a test of memory before they take it, right? What do you think happens? The older folks, right, get nervous. Oh my God, if I do badly, it's going to confirm in the eyes of these people that I have dementia. Right? And so they get nervous and they underperform. You have the same level of skill. Younger folks and older folks take the same test. Tell them it's a test of learned knowledge. Right? Now the older folks feel confident. The younger folks freak out. Oh my God, taking a test of learned knowledge against my grandmother. I don't know as much as her. And the underperformance is among the younger folks. Right? In other words, what this tells us is that our students, our professionals, the people in our institutional spaces bring a lot of baggage in with them. All the stuff from out there comes in, and it doesn't matter how committed our institutions are, that's still going to come in the door. We can be very open-minded, very progressive spaces, committed to equity and inclusion, and doing some really good work, by the way, and yet folks are still going to feel those pressures because there is that burden of representation holding it down for the group, and not having to do that is a huge privilege and we don't think of privilege that way, though. We think of privilege, that word that's up here, as just like a money thing or a power thing. Sometimes it is that, right? But it's also a psychological thing. It's that privilege of feeling comfortable in the space, right, in ways that a lot of other people don't. And we need to be fully aware of that so that we can talk about that with students. Because what the research tells us is if we want to diminish stereotype threat and the effect it has on performance, we have to speak directly to it, and we have to create policies, practices, and procedures, from classroom management to curricular choices to orientation program, all kinds of things that need to be done, most of which are actually pretty easy to do. But we won't do them if we don't understand the need for them, and we'll continue to replicate the policies that produce inequities, and the inequities that then get produced end up reinforcing the stigma, right? Because if certain students underperform relative to other students, or if certain professionals leave after a few years and we don't understand the context for why they're leaving, and we don't understand the context for why they're not performing at the same level in some cases, then it reinforces the notion that I guess they just weren't made for this place. I guess they just weren't cut out for this. They're just not good enough, when of course that's not true. But context is really important, because if we have inequities of performance, the students see that. And then they start making conclusions about why it is. And I think about this, I've got two daughters, 16 and 14. They attend university school and in Nashville. And they're dancers. That's their thing. And a couple years ago, when they were dancing in the same studio that happened to be downtown, they were in a dance company there. One day after school, I'm driving them from university school to the studio downtown in Nashville. It's about a 7 or 8 minute drive on surface streets, and we don't even bother with getting on the interstate. It's just quicker to go on the surface road. So as we leave USN, we drive, and USN is on a road that you go about 6 blocks down and there's public housing, 7 blocks down there's public housing. And we're at the stoplight. And we've made this drive every day for a year and a half. And I'm sure that my kids had noticed the demographic of the neighborhood at some point before that, right? But we get there, we're at the stoplight, and Rachel, the youngest of the two, who at that time was 10, is in the back seat, and she says, "Daddy, why is this neighborhood pretty much all black?" Now that is one hell of a good question. My child, my 10-year-old, is doing urban anthropology in the back of my Highlander. I'm so happy, right? And I'm especially happy because as a parent, as you know if you're a parent, right, there are lots of times your kids will ask you questions for which you do not have an answer at all. And as a parent, you'll normally just make something up because you're supposed to do that, I gather. But But this was a question my kid asked, like the one thing that daddy actually knows the answer to. Right? Like if you had to ask, like if she had asked, like, where does electricity come from? I'd be like, haven't y'all covered that yet? Like, Google it. I don't know. Look it up on your phone. Just leave me alone. But you asked me about race in America, and I'm good, right? That's the one thing I know. So she asked me the question, and I'm ready to give the answer, and it's like right here in my throat. I'm ready. I'm not gonna be able to give the PhD level version because she's 10, and we only have 3 minutes left before we get to the studio. But I'm gonna give her the elevator speech version of this, right? And so it's right here in my throat, and then something happened. I didn't know it was gonna happen. I'm an only child. But apparently, this is a thing, and those who are not only children will know. When a younger sibling asks a question to a parent in the presence of the older sibling, the older sibling will inevitably and without delay offer the answer so as to impress the parent and show up the younger sibling. I did not know this was a thing. I now know it is a thing. And so I've got the answer right here. Remember the question, Daddy, why is this neighborhood pretty much all black? I've got the answer. And then Ashton, the 12-year-old, says redlining, which was scary accurate. I was like, huh? Like, do you just know things? Like, have you been reading my books? Is it genetic? Did you just like, how do you know? Where'd that come? And then the 10-year-old Rachel was like, I don't know what that means. I said, yeah, I don't think your sister does either, but that was one hell of a good guess. For those who don't know the word, that is the practice that for many generations was common in this country, where banks and lenders would literally take red markers and circle black neighborhoods, mostly black neighborhoods, in urban areas around the country. And anybody who lived within the boundaries of that red line could not get a loan. It didn't matter what your credit was, didn't matter what your occupation or educational level was. If you lived in those boundaries, you weren't getting a loan, period. And that, of course, starved those neighborhoods of resources. Now, that's not actually why the neighborhoods became black. My daughter was a little wrong about that. That's why they're poor. It's one of the reasons they're poor. But the reason they actually became one race, by and large, was a little different, but it's a related phenomena, right? Ultimately, remember, public housing was built for white people. Black folks and brown folks were uniformly excluded from it from most of the units for the first couple of years. At the very same time, though, the government did what? They also created the FHA loan program, the VA loan program, later GI Bill benefits, which in theory were open to all, but in practice not so much. And so that allowed white folks to leave the cities, even if they were working class and struggling, leave the cities, move to the suburbs, get a house with a lawn where they pick up the trash twice a week. In other words, the government subsidized white flight, paid for white flight, actually invested in white flight, which left behind black and brown folks in the cities who then were redlined, deprived of capital. That's how the neighborhoods became black and poor. I dropped them off at the dance studio after giving them that little version. I felt pretty good about myself, but then this horror washed over me. And it was the horror of recognizing what would have happened if I did not know the answer to that question, or if other parents don't. Because my kid ain't the only one wondering, right? My kid ain't the only one who wonders, why do these people live over there and these people live over here? And why do these people go to school over here in a building that looks like that? And we go to school over here in a building that looks like this, right? Right? Because kids start wondering that. They start wondering why the spatial dynamics are what they are, whether it's in their school or in their neighborhood. And if you don't know the historical context, because see, children are not born with a sociological imagination. They are born curious, right? They are born wondering things and wondering about things and looking around and being amazed by them and asking questions. But the sociological imagination we have to provide for them, or else they will default. And if I don't have the answer to my daughter's question in the presence of both of my children, what do you think their default position is likely to be in this country? Their default position is going to be the only thing it can be in this country. It's the thing this country gave them. It's the fundamental building block of our ideology as a country, the notion that wherever you end up is all about you, right? If you work hard enough, you can make it. If you didn't make it, you just need to try harder. That notion of rugged individualism, which I beg to remind you is a myth. There's no such thing as a rugged individual. Indeed, there's no such thing as an individual. We are not individuals outside of a social context. Humans are social creatures. None of us were raised on an island by a porpoise. Right? In fact, if you ever meet anyone who really is a rugged individual, you need to get the hell away from that thing. Because it will be feral. It will be dangerous, right? It won't have language. It won't know that whole taboo about not eating you. You need to run from that. You don't want to be around that, right? There's no rugged individual. We're all social creatures. We're products of our environment, of our families, of the people that we meet throughout our lives. But our country says, as a building block of our ideology, that it's all up to you and you can be anything you want. Well, if we believe that, and we don't have a sociological imagination that interrogates it because our schools didn't insist upon it or our families didn't give it to us, then what do those children that we're trying to bring up in this world conclude? They conclude the reason those black folks live over here like this is because they just didn't work as hard. Because if they had, they wouldn't be over here like this. And the reason these white folks are over here and disproportionately in these schools and disproportionately in these neighborhoods is they just must be better. See, many years ago, y'all will remember in the 70s and early 80s, the National Conference of Christians and Jews, which later became the National Conference on Community Justice, had a commercial where they had the slogan was, "You have to be taught how to hate," right? Which is sort of a line that's ripped off from South Pacific for those who are musical theater fans, right? But you have to be taught how to hate. And I never was fully satisfied with that phrase because that sort of assumes that somebody's got to sit you down and actively teach you things like racism and sexism and homophobia and all those things. You have to be actively taught bigotry. But the reality is, if you come up in a society that tells you where you end up is all about you, and then you look around and you see dramatic inequalities of condition, you don't have to be taught how to hate. You're being taught indirectly, subtly every day, racism and sexism and classism, the assumption that those on the top of the pyramid must be there by dint of their own effort, hard work, and talent, and those on the bottom must have less of all of those things and therefore deserve their station as well. Those become almost rational conclusions unless we interrogate. So our schools have to be asking those questions, teaching those questions, encouraging that conversation if we're going to move to real equity. And our good intentions aren't enough because institutional inequity operates regardless. If we're still admitting students and hiring professionals using the same credentialocracies that we've always used, not meritocracy, not actual ability and talent, but credentials, we're going to continue to replicate inequality. Because look, if I've had a 5-lap head start in an 8-lap race, I ought to look better on paper, y'all. My resume ought to be more impressive if I had a 5-lap head start in an 8-lap race. The question is, am I actually running faster? Because I would argue if somebody starts 5 laps behind in an 8-lap race and at the end of the race they're only down by 3, they're the faster runner. So we need to be hiring people and we need to be admitting folks as students, or really, let's be honest, families, because our schools don't just admit students, they admit families, right? Not on the basis of our sort of historical accomplishments or our test scores or all these things. I mean, we can consider that. That can be part of the mix. But we've got to also be looking at other things. We have to be looking at the context within which people have achieved, right? And adjusting our standards appropriately, not so as to lower them, which is the knock we always, oh, you're lowering standards. No, we're adjusting standards to be more equitable, more fair, and more legitimate. Because if that person who starts out behind narrows the gap, they are indeed the faster runner. And the same is true with someone who scores a little bit lower on a test but had more to overcome in order to get that score. That's a more impressive student. It's not about lowering standards. You're actually raising them. Anybody who believes that our independent schools were places of better academic quality 50 years ago is not paying attention. It is not true. Anybody who thinks Harvard was a better school when they gave out gentlemen's C's to people that didn't even go to class and they were all white men isn't paying attention. Our schools, whether colleges or K-12 independent schools, are better. Our children know more, are learning more, are being challenged more than their parents and grandparents ever were, and they're being done that favor in more diverse, more equitable, and more multicultural space. There's no contradiction between diversity, inclusion, equity, and quality. The contradiction is in believing that there's a contradiction, right? There's no reason that we can't have both. We just have to be willing to stand on principle. And again, our good intentions are not enough. And our progressivism is not enough. I've been in a lot of independent schools that pride themselves on their progressivism, right? But sometimes that progressivism is this performative progressivism, or what is being called in certain circles nowadays performative wokeness, right? Right? And so I go to places where they're very proud of the fact, right, that the kids call the faculty by their first names, because that's supposed to be radical. Doesn't feel real radical to a lot of black folks. and a lot of people of color who were being called by their first name by little white children in this country in the 1800s who were 3 years old and would just call them by their first name, not as an act of respect, as an act of profound disrespect. So see, the stuff that sometimes we think is real progressive and that we don't mind as dominant group members hits black and brown folks a little bit differently because they've been waiting for the respect of being called by their last name and Dr. whatever and Mr. and Mrs. whatever for generations, right? But why do I have to tell you that? Right? Why is that even something that has to be said? We ought to know it, but a lot of schools I go to apparently don't. And then that faculty or administrator or staff member of color has to be the one that sort of spoils the cultural mood of openness by saying, no, I want to be called doctor, whatever. And you go, well, you know, like they're a stick in the mud. Like they're the one that's spoiling the otherwise open-minded mood of the school. See, that's performative stuff. It's not real. Or we do a lot of good community service work in our schools, and I'm not knocking it. Community service work is fine, but why is it always seemingly, not always, but so oftentimes built upon a premise of incapacity of the people that we're quote-unquote helping, right? Built on a deficit model that says we're going to bring all of our privilege and our money and our good intentions, we're going to help you, we're going to fix something in your neighborhood. We're going to come and build houses, we're going to come and feed hungry children, we're going to come and teach literacy to kids that don't know how to read, right? Why does it have to be based on charity rather than solidarity? Why does it have to be based on the notion that they're the ones with the deficit? Because see, some of our kids have got deficits, and our families have got deficits of understanding about the society in which they live. If you're going to teach literacy to kids in 6th grade that can't read, and you're not asking how in the hell you get to be 12 years old in this country in a school system and you don't know how to read, then you're not actually doing the work. If you're going and building houses for Habitat for Humanity and not asking yourself or being forced to ask yourself why in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world folks still aren't housed, if you're going to feed people who are hungry at a soup kitchen and you're not asking how it can be that in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world there are people who don't have enough food, you're not really doing the work. If we're going to do community service, it has to be based on the idea that we are acting not for but with the people in that community, and that not only do we have a service to provide, they've got something to teach us, and we need to listen. Several years ago when I went to Northfield Mount Hermon, and it was right after Katrina, and they were doing some incredible stuff because they had implemented a curriculum around what had happened in New Orleans. They were taking students down there, but one of the teachers who led that effort, the primary teacher who led that effort, made sure that before they went, they had an understanding of the historical dynamics of race and class in New Orleans. And when they got down there, they didn't just go out and strip houses of, rotting drywall or whatever, or help put up new stuff. They went and they sat with community leaders and they learned from them. Community service became a two-way street, a recognition that, yes, y'all have some needs that we can help fill, and we have some needs that y'all can help fill. And so this is going to be a reciprocal arrangement. We both have something to give. Right? It's a very important lesson for families and young people to learn that all of us have got gaps that need to be filled. Some of those are material gaps, and maybe those with more privilege can help fill some of those. But some of those are knowledge and experience gaps, life learning gaps that the marginalized have in abundance, a plethora of resources there that we don't have, that they can share, and that we need to value, to listen to what it is that they are saying, and to create space for them to do that. I've been to other independent schools that I think are doing an amazing job making sure that when you go, particularly for emerging populations of Spanish-speaking families and students in the community, many of whom are not yet really in large numbers in our independent schools, but they might be down the road in a close-by local public school. And for a long time, schools be like, we're going to go and help them learn English. That's going to be our service. But I've been to some schools that I think are doing it right, that are saying, yeah, we'll go do that, and then we're going to have those folks in that community help our kids learn Spanish, right? Because they have a skill, they have a talent that our kids need, and once again, we can make it reciprocal. It doesn't have to be a charity model. It can be a solidarity model. How can I help you? How can you help me? How can we build something different together? That's a very different mindset, and I think a very healthy one. So we can't rest on our laurels when it comes to these things. We have to lead with our missions. We have to make our missions central to everything we do. And we all have these lovely missions nowadays. Right? They're lovely. They really are. But I don't think that we've ever really asked the question, how do we operationalize this fully in policy, practice, and procedure with everything we do? How do we stand on principle? How do we make it clear to everyone in the community, the alums, the families, the teachers, the students, the community at large, that we are trying to create a community of learners, not just for the sake of learning in the abstract, but for the sake of improving the society in which we live. We're in a very dangerous time right now, as I said before, and there's really not any time to waste abstracting education from the broader project of creating multiracial, multicultural democracy. If we are not educating for multicultural, multiracial democracy, what are we doing in 21st century America? What are we doing if we're simply educating people so as to help get them into a good college or a good graduate program, put them on the track to professional success? That's a 19th century model of schooling. We need to upgrade both our skill sets and our understanding and our narrative, because the country into which we will be depositing our students is a fundamentally different one than even their parents knew, let alone their grandparents, their great-grandparents, their great-great-grandparents, or some of those 5 generations out who were the first graduating class members of some of our schools, because I've met folks like that. Some of y'all are in this room and you know who I'm talking about. There are folks like that as well, right? But the world is different. The needs of that world are different. Therefore, the needs of our students have to be different, and our families' needs have to be thought of in that context. We have to be brave enough to stand on these principles, even if it alienates certain people with long-standing connections to our institutions. A, because it's a moral issue, but B, it is also a practical one. Right? We are doing our children no good service if we treat them as though the world hasn't changed, and if we deposit them into colleges and universities that are going to demand that they know how to navigate these issues. See, colleges expect you to know how to do this. They expect you to know how to have this conversation, and one of the reasons sometimes that it gets so difficult at the higher education level is because we haven't done an adequate job, or we think we're doing an adequate job because we're comparing down at other schools that we think we're doing it better than. That's a real problem. That's a real problem for the school that my children attend. I dearly love University School of Nashville, but sometimes we can get a little bit lazy too, because we look at some of the other independent schools in Nashville and we go, at least we're not them. You know? At least we're doing it better than them. And at some point, and many of us in here, we all know that that's what we do. We even though there are schools doing it better than us, but we don't compare up, and we don't say, man, how can we do more of that? We compare down, and oh, thank goodness, you know? But that's just not enough. We have to demonstrate a real commitment. I know there's going to be pushback. I know there already is. Parents will scream. Alums will scream. I'm not going to give my money to yours. Bullshit. They're going to continue to give you their money. You know how I know that? Because everybody bluffs. Everybody with a lot of money likes to make a lot of noise about how they're not going to. We've been 5 generations. Right. You've been 5 generations at that school, and you're so bought in to that identity, you are not going to pull your funds. And let me tell you, because they do the same thing in college. I remember University of Illinois back in 2007 when they made him get rid of the chief logo because it was incredibly racist and the NCAA said you can't use it. And all these University of Illinois alums with a lot of dough, I'm not going to give you another $1, right, if you don't bring the chief back. Well, that was nonsense. They didn't lose any money. In fact, they made more money because there were other people who finally decided that university was actually about something. See, we got to act like we need to stop acting like there's some fixed pool of people out there. Oh, I mean, there might be some folks that get angry. I'm not going to send my kids there anymore. I'm going to pull my money out. So what if they do? You know what? There are other folks out there more open-minded than that who have money who don't go to your schools right now because they view them as elitist institutions of privilege and power. And if you would change those policies, they would come through your doors in a heartbeat. I know, because I was one of those parents. I was a public school kid, and I'm still one right here. In an ideal world, let me just say it, in an ideal world, these institutions that we're talking about here today wouldn't exist. In an ideal world, would not exist. And I know we're not living in that world, and that's fine. We're trying to create a more equitable and just one, perhaps, that would get us there. But here's the thing. I dearly love the school that my children attend, but it was a struggle for me to go to that, to become part of that institution. And let me tell you, it's a struggle for some of the folks in this room to work in those spaces, right? Unless they come from those spaces, and even if they do come from those spaces, it can be hard because you understand that first point that I made about how privilege and inequality is not a glitch, but a feature, right? It was hard, but I made the decision. You know why I made the decision? I didn't make the decision. I mean, my wife and I made it together. She had her own reasons, but I'll tell you what mine were. It didn't really have to do with the academic quality at USN, which I knew was great. It didn't have to do with the reputation. It didn't have to do with any of that. It had to do with the fact that Caroline Blackwell was the director of multicultural affairs at that time at that institution, and I knew her well, and I knew her work, and I had great respect for her. And she convinced me to come to an open house. She said, look, we can't kidnap you, tie you up, and make you come. Why don't you just come check it out? And I knew Caroline, and I respected Caroline, and I respected any institution that would have her around for as long as they did doing that work. That's why I made the decision. I brought my money in that place that I wouldn't have brought previously, and if she hadn't been there, because I would have had this sort of sideways view of the school, even though it is the liberal private school in Nashville. Right? That didn't mean anything to me. That really didn't matter to me until I knew that they had a commitment to really talking about some of these difficult things and doing some things around those subjects. And it's a commitment that we still have to be very deliberate about, because we can slack up and we can fall down on the job. All of our schools have better and worse days, better and worse years, better and worse efforts, and sometimes those efforts fail. But let me just tell you something. When you stand on principle, when you say this is what we are about, right, you create a different kind of branding. And I hate to even use that language, the dead language of the American business class, but there it is, right? It's about branding, fine. Let's really try to differentiate ourselves in a different way, because there's only so much you can do to improve your academic reputation or your historical reputation, right? That stuff is sort of fixed. Same way it is in colleges. Like if you're Harvard, you're always going to be at the top or near the top. Stanford, same thing. Princeton, same thing, right? So if you're way down the list, in colleges or independent schools in terms of reputation, there's only so much you're going to be able to do to increase the size of your endowment. There's only so much you're going to be able to do to increase the academic reputation or get on whatever list of great independent schools there is. And if you're at the top, you're probably not going to slide far down. So why not think of a different way to brand yourself, to create a different way of understanding what you could be in the world, right? And saying this is what it means now to be this, as opposed to what it might have meant 30 years ago and 40 years and 50 years ago, right? If you do that, then you open up your institutional space to a whole lot of different folks. And I don't just mean people of color. I mean other white folks who never wanted to come to your space either, but who might now if they actually see that those are spaces that are preparing our children for the way the world is, not the way that the world was. And so in this moment where there is so much tension, so much fear, so much concern about whether people belong, and not just in our independent schools, but in our country itself, where we have children and families that are literally wondering whether today is the day that the knock comes on the door and they get sent out of this country, or told at their school events that they should be sent out of this country. As long as that is happening, we have to make a decision about who we are going to be. You're not in a position to change this society in and of itself on your own. You are in a position to make changes in your institutional space that will determine the future of your families and your children's lives and the space where you are, the institutional life of that space. You are in a position to stand on principle, to let folks know what it is you're about, and to announce that a new day has come to our independent school communities, where we're not just going to focus on the surface level performative wokeness, diversity, and inclusion, but we're going to create equity. And I believe you will do that. I will help you do that. Many of the people in this room will help you do that. And I thank you all so much for being here. Thank you.